Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, 2 seconds. My name is Brian Hughes. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of KILTR. KILTR is a social platform which focuses on what we call the good stuff, which is culturally relevant content. I'd like to just say a big welcome to everybody. A big thanks to our great panel here behind us, including our lovely chair. This is the third in the series of independence referendum debates. The first one we did here, which was focused on the creatives. The second one we did in New York, which was focused on an international aspect of a huge decision that we're all going to have to make and hopefully get involved in September of this year. People asked us why we did that in New York. Well, I'll tell you why we did that. To portray a more contemporary, a more real picture of Scotland. And it gives me a great pleasure to do the third one here today with this lovely panel sitting behind us. This is not about us, it's not about KILTR. This is about Scotland, and we're doing it because we care. I'd like to just finish by saying a huge thanks to all the KILTR team, because we work hard with minimum resources. We put this on our own. Our platform's impartial at the moment, and we're looking forward for everybody to get involved come September. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand you over to our lovely chair, Anna Burnside, and let's hope it's another great debate. Thank you.
I like being a lovely chair. I'm thinking, Eames Lounger. Hello everybody and welcome to this KILTR debate at the CCA today. I'm going to be chairing this lovely event. I'm Anna Burnside. I'm a freelance journalist. If you want to read me writing about Prince Charles or Glasgow School of Art, Scotland on Sunday, if you want to see humiliating pictures of me doing a new exercise regime, can I direct you to the Daily Record? And if you're at the dentist, pick up your Scottish Field because I'll probably be in there as well. On the panel today we have Brian Cox. My apologies in advance to anybody who's expecting the guy that thinks we're all made of stars. This is in fact King Lear, Hannibal Lecter, or William Stryker, depending on your age and cultural references. Brian has been commentating and following the independence debate from his home in New York. I like to think of him and Alan Cumming sitting together, drinking rhubarb bellinis, going over the polls in a pop-up bar in Brooklyn, but I might just have an overheated imagination.
You certainly do.
Don't spoil it for me.
I don't drink for a start, so.
Okay, well, you have a soda and lime. Mark McGowan is also known as Chunky Mark, also known as the artist taxi driver. He's a performance artist, an activist, a YouTube star. I don't think it would be unfair to call him a troublemaker. I'm thinking of him myself as Limmy meets Owen Jones, but you can all make up your own minds on that one. Can I commend to you his Wikipedia profile, which I liked very much. There's a panel called Controversy, which lists the following examples. Controversy and legal challenges. Row with soldiers. Swan eating. Reenactment of conception of Prince William, support of Jade Goody, and corgi eating. So I hope that if anyone has brought an establishment-friendly pet with them today, they've left them in the cloakroom. On this side, we have John McTernan, who has been a spin doctor, advisor, and strategist for the Labour Party in the UK and in Australia. In Australia, he worked for Julia Gillard. And those of you who don't follow Australian politics, the Australian Parliament basically makes the Saturday night in Sauchiehall Street look like a tea party. He's a tough fella. It's been alleged that he was the inspiration for Jamie MacDonald in The Thick of It and In the Loop. And if that's the case, I hope no one's brought a fax machine. I knew that was going to happen. The last member of the panel is Susan Dalgety. Susan's been a councillor, a journalist, and when I first met her, she was the editor of the Wester Hill Sentinel. I was the editor of the Gorgie Dorai Gazette. I was in awe of her. I thought I was great, and nothing that has happened since has caused me to change my mind. So I think you'll all agree it's a fantastic panel. We're lucky to have them. And first question, please. John Traynor.
Susan, as a journalist myself, I'm acutely aware of the huge influence the media, both written and broadcast, can have in the outcome of any vote. But I'd like you and the panel to consider that this is not, nothing is fair in this life, but this is not a level playing field, in that most of the editorial lines come from London, where the big chief, as in newspapers and radio and television companies, where the big chiefs, they call the shots. And of course, they are in bed with the unionists, the Better Together. Therefore, as I said, it isn't fair. But I was wondering how dangerous it is to the Yes campaign, of which I am part of, and how advantageous it is to the Better Together campaign. And finally, there's one place where you cannot, the social media is one place where nobody can control what you want, what you need. And maybe that should and could play a larger part than it is at present before September 18. Thank you.
So, Susan, are the national newspapers biased towards a no vote?
John, I think it's quite interesting. Can everybody hear me? I think it's really quite interesting that the only, as far as I'm aware, only national newspaper that has so far actually come out with an editorial line in support of independence, its ownership actually you can trace back to Arlington in Virginia, where Gannett, the owner of the Sunday Herald, is based, and their UK headquarters is Surrey. So I really think you can overplay the influence that the owners of newspapers have on the editorial line. I'm probably closest. I put on public policy conferences for the Scotsman, so I know the people there pretty well. And they're owned by Johnson Press, based in Peterborough. But the decision about whether the Scotsman or any other national newspaper, what their editorial line is taken by the editorial team. People like Ian Stewart and Kenny Farquharson don't have people from London phoning them up and telling them what to say in their leaders. In fact, two of the best writers in support of independence, Leslie Riddick and Joyce McMillan, both have weekly columns in the Scotsman. And I also would disagree a little bit in the influence that newspapers have on politics. I think politicians and leader writers sometimes get over-exercised about both their influences. I think people make up their mind from a variety of sources. And one of those, as you say, is social media. Social media, I think, is one of the greatest inventions of the last 300 years. It has its downsides. Anybody who's been trolled by cybernats or people on the other side, everybody is guilty of having trolls, knows that it can be quite unpleasant. I think the worst thing I've been called, however, is a unionist blue bottle, and I think I can live with that. I was a bit upset when I was described as being ugly, but never mind. But no, I think social media is definitely going to have a huge role in the campaign as we head towards 18th of September. Brian?
I would agree that social media will have, and actually is probably the thing that does have most sway, and hopefully will have most sway, because it seems to be the way that you get most opinion. Unfortunately, the newspapers, it cannot be said the same of. Certainly we've had it with the Herald. The Herald has actually come out and, as it were, and whether it's from Arlington or where have you, it has nailed its colours very firmly to the mast. But you do get the sense of bias. But also there are so many other factors at work. There are career issues at work. There are sort of career newspaper men, just in the way there are career politicians. And therefore they guide it in a certain kind of direction. And I think they'll find a lot of it is being guided in that direction, kind of almost hysterically. I sort of come from, I've been living in the UK for the last 2 years, but I live in the States. And I can see a very, very clear bias, like it's like the elephant in the room, the independence thing. And certainly the London-based papers, you would not know very much about it. You get a better sense of it up here, because you realise it's going on. It's there, but it's not really it doesn't really get the coverage it deserves, in its minutiae and its delicacy, and it's especially the things. And I've found out more about the independence debate through the social media than anything else. So and I think that's the way we're going.
John.
Oh, look, I've been a politician, I've been a journalist, I've been a spin doctor. All I need to do now is be an estate agent and a used car salesman. I'll have the full set of professions that nobody respects. But the truth is, our journalists in Scotland, the journalists in the UK, are pretty professional. They are pretty good and they're pretty decent. But more importantly, we've got the best educated and most critical audience for newspapers and media we've ever had. And that's the most important thing. Newspapers can't tell voters what to do. I used to write editorials. All the reader surveys say 5% of readers read the editorial. Now, you can say it's the right 5%, but it's still only 5%. And for me, social media is great. Social media is expanding the range of sources, but we need to be a bit honest about it. Twitter is people like me talking to people like me, or being talked at by people like me, and it's great, but it's an echo chamber of a small number, about 10% of people in Scotland are on Twitter. Facebook is the one. Facebook's the most powerful influence. Half people in Scotland are on Facebook. Why is Facebook so powerful? Because you read what your friends are doing and what your friends are recommending. The only way to change hearts and minds anywhere in politics nowadays is to influence people's families, influence your friends, influence their friends. Newspapers don't do that. The most influential newspapers are actually the most local newspapers. It's the Wester Hill Sentinel or it's the Gorgon Dalry Recorder. They're the ones that are trusted, and those don't get their editorial line from anybody.
Mark, you've bypassed really the mainstream media. What's your take on this?
Well, I don't know where the other guy's gone. They're writing notes down there. We've got a couple of journalists in here now. Are you a journalist? Where are you from?
The Herald.
The Herald. What?
The Daily Herald.
The Daily Herald.
Also the Sunday
But what this guy was just saying as well, the news is not the news. The news is not the news. Like they say that they worked in journalism. They're journalists. They're in there. I did 10 years critiquing news media. All those things that Anna read out, rolling on the floor, eating corgis. You know, a lot of it was... my primary purpose was to get on the news. The only thing I wanted to do was get on the news as a critique. They were phoning me up. You know, I'm forward planning next Wednesday. You know, I'm on Sky over the Easter holidays. Are you doing anything? I can think of something to do. The news is not the news. You know, when they talk about social media, social media is tied in. The primary source, the authoritative voice, the thing that your mum, your dad, your brother and your sister listen to is the 6 o'clock BBC News, the 10 o'clock BBC News. That's it. Everything else after that is second. This is Austin's performative utterances. You know, when you do acting, when you talk, when you use words, it's the authoritative voice.
But Mark, do you think the mainstream media, we're talking here mainly about newspapers and news programmes, do you think they're biased against...
But, I mean, we're here, where are we? Who are we? We're in the middle of the bloody centre of contemporary art. Do you know what I mean? And I noticed that we're the creatives on this side, by the way. I noticed that. But the UKIP has come out. A guy in UKIP, he came out. Do you know what he said? We didn't do very well in the areas where, you know, there was some sort of like... No, but you know, I speak to people. You know, I give up teaching. My main job is I'm a janitor, so I see lots of people on my estate where I work. But I mean, scaffolders, builders. You know, when you hear people, when I was talking to Frankie this morning, 2 days after saying let's bomb Syria, you know, you'd be in a cafe down the road. Yeah, I think we should. You know, that is the power of a headline. You know,
Mark, I hate to disturb you when you're telling us about the breakfast conversation at Frankie's house, but really, the question here...
The whole thing is a trigger, right? When I was working in journalism, when I wanted to get on the news, I found out something. I found out the power of a headline.
Right, power of the headline, that's a brilliant place to stop, because our next question is also, Mark, I'm so sorry,
Okay,
Mark, but
sorry.
our next question is also about the news. And, well, this is all about the news, so you'll have plenty of chances, more chances to come in. Prina has a question for Brian.
It's Prena. That's my name. Yep, so apparently the BBC gets £320 million per annum from the Scottish TV licence fee. In the event of a no vote, should the BBC delegate more control to BBC Scotland in terms of what's broadcasted to alleviate these concerns of BBC impartiality?
Brian.
Yes. Yes, of course. The BBC is a very interesting organisation, but again, it's an organisation that is, it's feudal. It's scaled in a certain kind of way, and people are pursuing their careers, so they go off to the regions to do certain things. I just did quotes, by the way, for anybody who's just listening to this. And I think that one of the problems is, and it's a problem that we run into all the time, for example, I did a television recently called Shetland, and I thought I was pretty shit hot in the fact that I really managed to conquer the accent. And I discovered some wonderful words in the accent. But I was told very firmly that I really had to do a revoicing of the accent because it was too strong. It was too strong for the average public. Now, as an artist, I was extremely affronted by this because even though I was doing an accent, I was extremely clear. But it was coming because it was aimed at a certain audience. And it was a decision which was not an artistic decision. It was a decision that was a sort of BBC decision.
And sorry, Brian, but did you think having more control based in Scotland, would that have changed that
Of course it
decision,
would have done. Of course it would have done. And because we would understand our own language and we would have respect for our own language and we'd have respect for our own regional language. I mean, my argument was, well, you didn't dub the bridge. You were quite happy to have it in subtitles. I said, why don't you if you want to do it in subtitles. And unfortunately, there is a BBC mentality at work. And it's a mentality which is based on careerism. It's based on where you are in the pecking order and what your ambitions are. Certain things like people delivering scripts to the BBC, decisions, particularly now, at this time, because the future of the BBC is in debate up here as to what happens after September the 18th, certain things are not being decided upon because people are a little afraid to make what should be artistic decisions and not political decisions. But unfortunately, politics permeates everything, and it's impossible to separate it out. It does. And I think the BBC has tried desperately. It was, after all, started really by a Scotsman, which has to be said, Reith, who had Reithian principles, which were great principles. I remember somebody telling me the story of John Reith when he was asked about BBC television drama way back in the 50s. And he was asked, he said, he was then Sir John Reith, he said, Sir John, what should be my brief? He said, laddie, your brief is simple. Get the best drama to the maximum number of people. And that principle has kind of been eradicated because we haven't seen that. So we get these kind of, and also we get a lot of bad habits, hence Jamaica Inn that we just said the other week, where the sound man got blamed, and that guy who got the award, I said, you should have apologized to the sound man. That was the first thing you should have done, for not actually doing your job properly. And so I get very bothered about it because I do think it's not a fair pitch. It really isn't in terms of what we are treated a little bit regionally. And I think BBC Scotland is an amazing place. It has got some great work. There are great people working there, doing the best kind of work. But they find it difficult when they make a great programme, A, to get the repeat on the programme or to get it networked. Because somebody said, oh, well, somebody else is doing something similar elsewhere. So it isn't fair. And it needs to be rethought.
Susan?
Yes.
Level playing field, or does there need to be more power devolved to Scotland, even if there's a no vote?
I think there needs to, Prena, I think is a really good question. I think there needs to be more power devolved across the whole of the United Kingdom. The BBC's charter is up in 2016, I think. It has to be renewed. I think there's an opportunity now to actually look at how our national broadcaster works right across the whole of the United Kingdom, across BBC Scotland, in Yorkshire, down in Cornwall, in Wales,
Absolutely.
in Northern Ireland. I also think, again, Ashley Highfield, who is the Chief Executive of Johnson Press, spoke recently at the Newspaper Society's AGM, and he's a former BBC executive. He called for the BBC to work much closely with regional newspapers and the regional media because, as John had said earlier, and as Anne and I both know, people trust their local media in a way that perhaps they don't trust national broadcasters. The whole point of the BBC is to produce great content that educates and informs. The BBC, which is owned by us, should be working right across the UK with local communities and with local media to deliver the best possible content for the whole of the UK.
Mark, briefly, best possible content from the BBC?
Well, I think, like, you know, it's so London-centric. Everything comes from there. You know, even someone said to me, if you know, they're asking people from Scotland if they've got a night to come to London. You know, they're not going to like bother their asses to come up here. You know, they can't make it, or like, you know, if you've got an idea, come down and tell us about it. You know, that by itself tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
actually, I just interrupt you there, Mark. There's a bit of buck passing has been going on in that direction. They have actually been sending people up here, knowing that they can't make the decision up here because of what's going on down in London, and so it doesn't get made for that reason. Not because they don't want to make the programmes here; they want to, but it has to be finalised down in London.
John, you
Sorry to interrupt.
were murmuring assent there.
Well,
Briefly.
the most important thing about the BBC is it's non-commercial. It doesn't have to make a profit. It uses the licence fee. It's very important that the impartiality stays. It's important to have more content created across all platforms, across all of the UK. The relocation of some production to Glasgow, some production to Manchester, that is a start. But let's be clear, one of the things that the current Tory government are doing is using the Charter Review to threaten the BBC and to threaten their impartiality. And by and large, the BBC do a pretty good job, and we need to make sure that their independence and autonomy is defended as we strengthen their place across the country.
Andy has a question for John. Hello, Andy.
Hello, can you hear me?
I think the microphone is just coming to you, Andy.
Given the landslide margin of the SNP's election victory in 2011 and the fact that was largely attributed to the social media campaign that was associated with it, John, do you think that the journalism as a kind of a sector is a dying kind of as a dying profession as we see the kind of proliferation of content-driven, user-generated social media platforms?
Look, as somebody who's written columns for the Scotsman of Scotland on Sunday since 2001, I must hope that it's not a dying profession. The truth about the 2011 election campaign is that Labour were beaten badly and deserved to be beaten badly because they weren't offering anything to Scotland. That's what politics is about, right? You put something up and you get knocked around the head. What you have to do is go back and think again and come back with a better proposition. I don't think it's about social media is a good way. We talked before, a good way of communicating in certain ways, influencing in certain ways. It's not a substitute for journalism, for investigative journalism, for the kind of journalism that, you know, reporters on the ground, reporters that actually ask hard questions. Look, both the Scotsman and the Herald have reporters who are very good at asking difficult questions of government, of all sorts of governments, and using freedom of information to get information out that people don't want heard, whether it is Alex Salmond's tartan trews or whether it is Jack McConnell's grey kilt. You know, it's important that we have organised journalism, well-resourced journalism. It's a very difficult marketplace at the moment for any journalists. All newspapers are struggling wherever they are because the revenue is moving onto the internet and outside of Europe and outside of America. The thing that's happening in America, which we can hope for here, is that some of the .com millionaires and billionaires are spending their money now back on print journalism. So there's an appetite for good journalism. We see it in crowdsourcing in sites here, but there's an appetite for the good, basic, decent kind of journalism, which involves, you know, a reporter coming along on a Sunday and sitting down taking notes about this to write about it tomorrow, because there's people who are not going to be watching the streaming, they're not going to be watching it on Vimeo when it goes up, but they are going to be interested in the fact we're having a conversation about the future of media in Scotland. So, long may journalism live. Journalism is a decent, honourable profession. It's like acting. We don't want to see any of these professions disappear from Scotland. They should be complemented by social media, not replaced by them. And social media is just a different way of us talking to each other. And the great thing about conversation is that we should listen to each other and converse with each other and have a sense of manners and decorum. And that actually, by and large, through this independence debate, despite passionate beliefs held on all sides, has, I think, been the mark of it so far.
Mark, has social media edged out?
Well, what I think is this. Like when I said before, the news is not the news, what is it then? What is it? It's another form of advertising. What they're talking about here is journalism. You know, what people write. That is not what people are pissed off at. Citizen journalism is born out of disseminating the news, trying to work out what? That's not right. What are you saying? Because the news, what I was talking about before, the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock news, is another form of advertising, because every single institution has 4 times as many people that is in here working in PR and working in marketing, trying to affect the news, trying to tell you, maybe not trying to tell you what you think, but tell you what you want to think about. You know, and that's what people are pissed off at. That's why people like the Facebook. That's why people like the Twitter, and people putting things like, because they've got a legitimate voice that they want to. This is shit. What are they saying? This isn't right. Do you know what I mean? Selling the NHS. What the hell is that? You know, and even if you think about it in terms of Scotland, right? And that guy down there told me about the McGowan report. You know, where they hid, like that Scotland could be the richest country in the whole of Europe, as big as Kuwait, you know, bigger than Switzerland, that instantaneously overnight you would get 30% more money. And what did they do with it? They marked it secret and they hid it. You know, the Labour Party done that, but it was asked by the Tories to do it, but it was the Labour Party, Dennis Healey, secret, don't ever look at it. You know what I mean? You don't need to know about that stuff. You do not need to know. That is not going to be on your news. And now we've got social media. Now you're allowed to say something about that.
Brian, do you agree? Has social media taken over from the traditional press? The dead tree press, as some people unkindly call it?
I don't think it's taken over, but I think it kind of complements in a way. I do think that actually journalists now, because of social media, could be a little bit freer than they're being sometimes. And I think that they can actually really develop an argument, because the problem is that the problem with all news, the problem with all kind of articles on various subjects is it's so complicated. This independence debate is a very, very complicated issue. I mean, you can either be ruled by the heart or you're ruled by the head. You know, you're ruled by, there are so many different elements to it. So what you get with really good journalism is where the heart and head are beautifully balanced. And that kicks off into the social media, because the social media said, did you see blah blah's article on such and such? And it spreads. Now that feeds, one thing feeds the other. The journalist feels empowered. Now, a lot of the times with journalism, and because of the strictures of the press, they haven't felt empowered. Now, I think one of the effects that the social media does is it empowers journalists more and more to be able to do certain things.
Susan, are you feeling empowered by social media?
Oh, well, yeah, I just love social media for lots of different things. But can I just go back to what Mark was saying about the news is the news and about holding people to account? Because that is the biggest and most important role that journalism plays in our society, which is holding governments and companies and people in influence to account. So whether it is on social media, whether it's on dead trees, whether it's on your nightly news or your community newspaper, the role of journalism is to hold people in power to account. The problem we're facing at the moment, the challenge we're facing, is how you pay for that. Because with the best will in the world, citizen journalism doesn't always have either the training, experience or the resources to do good quality investigative journalism properly. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting struggle that the media is having just now, which we are all engaged in. We should, it's very important to all of us how that pans out. Can I just talk about the social media and elections though? Because I was lucky enough, I was a volunteer on Obama's campaign in 2008 and 2012, and people think that it was social media that won those campaigns for Obama. It was, but perhaps not in the way that we think. It wasn't the noise on Twitter that won it, particularly in 2012. It was the data that the social media generated, and that the campaign worked out how to use that data, usually through Facebook, where people gather, and then that fed the traditional ground game in campaigns, the people like me who were knocking on the doors in Pennsylvania with information that had been gathered from 2008 onwards. So social media has the potential to change our elections and our democracy significantly, but it's the data that where the real change is going to happen, and I think that's something we should all keep an eye on.
So that leads us on very well into Simone Evans' question for Mark. Simone?
Hi.
Check.
Thanks. Yeah, so Mark, as an artist, having used the internet in particular ways to engage with politics, how do you think that different kinds of people could exploit social media to engage with politics and articulate their own views? Yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got that. Okay, so Terence McKenna, I said this last night, anyone who's it. Terence McKenna, he said that culture is not your friend. Culture is not your friend. He said, we are led by the least amongst us, the least noble, the least visionary, the least intelligent. And there was a cry in the audience, say, how do we fight back? And he said, make art. Make art. Because they don't know how to respond to it. Do you know, they don't want there to, you know, make your own roadshow, he said. Make your own roadshow. You know, in this country, because you're talking about art, like I spent a long time in universities doing tutorials, you know, and it felt so uninspired, you know, because they weren't politicising their work. And, you know, in this country, we have I was talking about earlier, the right to be lazy, the right to be lazy, the right to have the time to think. You know, musicians, artists, novelists, you know, how many people made their work on the dole? On the dole, you know, but they don't want there to be art. They don't want to have artists in it. You know, we billions and billions of pounds goes back into the exchequer, out of music, out of novels, out of films made in this country. Why would they cut the arts? Every government cut the arts all the way through. Why would they do that? Why would Michael Gove? Why would the education? Trisha Munt's the same. Why would they? My son's getting 6 weeks a year doing art at school. That is purposeful. That is purposeful. When you turn up at the dole office, when you go down to get a job, they shouldn't be sending you to Argos or Tesco's. They should be giving you a fucking guitar. They should tell you to go out and create something, you know, be somebody. You know, everyone's got a dream, you know, and that thing about going onto the televisual field, or now it's like the space field of the internet. You know, it's there. Everyone has the opportunity. You know, but it's not being sponsored. We're not looking after people. Never have done. Never will do. Because the power elite won't let you. That's why they shut down Occupy. That's why that's why Chuki Amuna from the Labour Party wrote with Tessa Jow to shut down, to criminalise squatting. Why would he do that? Because them people there, even though they need a roof over their head, they politicise themselves. They write music. They write poetry.
Mark, great. Before we get on to more squatting and less art, John, do we need more art?
Yeah, look, one of the things that Alan McGee used to say is that Margaret Thatcher was responsible for Creation Records because the Enterprise Allowance Scheme allowed him to develop a business when he was on the dole. And I think there should be spaces like that created, and I think we've come to realise the importance of culture for individuals as a form of expression and liberation, but also to culture as a driver of the renovation of a city. Where would Glasgow be without that recognition of Glasgow's unique culture? Where would Scotland be without Edinburgh having started that festival? And imagine the people who set up the Edinburgh Festival in those dark years, the early years just straight after the war. Great vision. It's now become one of the exemplars of the world. So yes, we need more culture. I think to go back to the core question about social media, the great thing about social media is the democratic nature of it. Anybody can start to have a voice there. And we've seen it, that people start to have a voice and people come to listen to them and other people listen to them and people link to them and you can proliferate. You don't need to go through the hierarchical process that Brian described about how do you get your way up the Byzantine structures of the BBC to give a script or pitch an idea to the right person. You can actually create something and you could build something like KILTR. That is the thing that we have. So I think the finest thing about social media is that in a way the most irreverent voices, the most personal voices, the most authentic and the funniest voices are the ones that break through. If you simply do normal political claptrap and spout the line, no one listens to you, or if they listen to you, they make fun of you, and so they should. And that's part of that's part of the democratic nature of it. It levels us all down to a level where all of our voices are equal, and the strongest and most insightful voice should be the one that people listen to.
Brian, do you think social media has been a great equaliser in the arts?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, I just feel that in the arts, we've always treated the arts, I think Mark is absolutely right, we've always treated the arts in a very, very kind of, oh, it's them over there, and we don't realise that it's us over there, not them over there, it's us. Lindsay Anderson, the great filmmaker, once said, when somebody was asking him, he said, aren't you, somebody said when he was criticising, he says, aren't you biting the hand that feeds you? He said, not only is it my job to bite the hand that feeds me, but it is my job to try and bite it off. And I think that's what an artist should be doing, and that's what we should have space for. We constantly did that. I mean, even Stalin, when Bulgakov when the theatre in Russia was very, very strong during the Soviet period. It was actually where people went to get the truth. If people wanted to get the truth, they didn't read the newspapers, they went to the theatre. And Stalin knew that that was important, and they tried to ban a play of Bulgakov's called The White Guard. And Stalin said, I would like to see The White Guard. He never went to the theatre, so they performed The White Guard, and he watched it, and it was all about, White Russians and kind of, there was a lot of things that were espoused in there, which was totally against the Soviet thinking. And afterwards, the Politburo came around thinking that Stalin would say, yes, ban it. And he said, no, leave it the way it is. That's very important. That has to be there. Otherwise, we can't have a society. He said, we don't have that kind of voice of dissent, we have no society. And he was very clever. He kind of used it in a sort of way, and that's also what you've got to be careful about, because the artists have got to be very careful of not becoming tame ducks in some kind of way. But our attitude towards the artists has always been particularly awful, and it's the one way we can improve it.
Susan, briefly, do you think social media has made artists tame ducks?
I was actually going to answer Simone's question, if that's okay.
Fire it, go ahead.
Simone,
knock yourself out.
Social media has given voice to people who did not have a voice before. And one of the things that makes me really optimistic about social media and its power is how it's reinvigorated feminism. Everyday Sexism campaign, which started as a hashtag, turned into a movement and now is a book sitting there on the front window of Waterstones. Yes, All Women is a new campaign that has started. So the social media has tremendous power of uniting individuals together to build a movement, and movements that make change. And also, the great thing about social media is that there are no borders. So for the last 5 days, I have spent my spare time, following the elections in Malawi, which is a country where I do a lot of work and which has a big relationship with Scotland. Now, those elections are in a bit of a mess. There's had to be a recount of all the votes, starting from today. But one of the reasons that those elections will, at the end of this process, have been seen to be fair and absolutely transparent is because of social media. Because in Africa, the growth of mobile communications has been tremendous, and people are using mobile communications and social media to actually hold the elites to account, and also to communicate with people. I was texting an 88-year-old woman in Malawi 5 minutes before I came on stage. So social media has huge potential for good. It's time to open the floor up to anybody else who has a fantastic question. We have 2 people with microphones, 1 at each side. So if I could see anyone who's got a burning question. Yep, there with the beard, and then we'll come to blue shirt in the front.
Hi, I'm Andy. Do you feel that despite social media, there's still quite a lot of general apathy about independence and about the vote across Scotland in general?
Oh, who wants to jump in with that? Brian, maybe?
I don't know about the apathy. I think the Scots have this curious habit of keeping their cards very close to their chest. They kind of don't always want to declare themselves until they have to declare themselves. So there's a lot of speculation goes on at the moment. And it's a very Scottish thing. You know, they don't, you know, they're playing poker, they don't give it away what they've got, what their hand is. And I think we're finding that quite a lot. So it's very hard to say, I think, how this debate's going. I mean, they can do this poll and that poll, and people will say what they feel or say what for the benefit of the pollsters. But I'm not sure whether it's, I mean, I get a feeling there's not apathy out there. I think there might have been at one point, but I think now people know the way they want to go, but we will not know it until the day.
Susan, apathy?
No, not at all. I think the vast majority of people are busy living their everyday lives, you know, struggling to pay the mortgage, to make sure the kids are doing well at school and whatever. They will bring their minds to this in the last few weeks of the campaign. I think you usually find in campaigns, elections of any kind, people like us, the anoraks, are obsessed with it, but you know, normal people aren't, because there's far too many more important things happening in their life. However, I think everybody in Scotland will have an opinion, and I think the turnout will be good, high, and that can only be good for democracy.
I'm going to go to another question and we'll share about the answering, if that's okay with everyone, to get plenty of people in. So blue shirt, please.
Hi there, Stephen Watson, Dr. Stephen Watson, University of Glasgow, School of Mathematics. I founded Academics for Yes, inspired by the online community, which made me recognise that one could bypass traditional means of reaching people and go online and do it that way. I'm going to try and put a question to John McTernan, but I also want to contrast it with something Mark had just noted there about Scotland's prosperity and the traditional view that Scotland is a nation of scroungers and benefit frauds. So John McTernan wrote in the Telegraph, so I'm going to put some words to you, your words. 30th of August 2011, he wrote an article titled, "Tell the Truth, Scotland has been indulged for too long," and he continued in the article that when it comes to public spending, Scotland is a mendicant nation. So I've been informed the mendicant was a monk with no rights, that's the historic origin of the term, that's commonly understood to be dependent on charity or a beggar. So again, when it comes to public spending, John McTernan writes, Scotland is a mendicant nation, always looking for more. Now I want to contrast John's response to that, as I'm sure he's going to come back and defend himself, with perhaps an outsider, Mark McGowan, who's discovered, to his great surprise, that historically Scotland has had, and this is pre-oil, it's easy to examine the data on that, Scotland has been a very wealthy nation, and the extent to which it's had access to its resources is a question that's worth examining historically, and a question in which the democracy, or the democratic deficit which has prevented it from accessing its resources, has operated. Perhaps Mark can feed in a view from the outside.
Thank you. John, mendicant nation. Right.
Oh, look, if I thought this was going to be a set of questions about the past of John McTernan as opposed to the future of Scotland, I'd have come prepared for that. But here's the situation. I'm a socialist. Oh, seriously, I'm a socialist. I'm very happy that the rest of the UK transfers between 12 and 15 billion pounds a year to Scotland to support public spending here. That actually is socialism and social democracy in action, and it's working. This is one of the richest countries in the world, the UK. Scotland has got an ageing population, therefore it's got bigger needs in terms of healthcare, bigger needs in terms of social care, and a bigger cost in terms of pensions. It is right that, in my view, is right that is paid for by the richer parts of the rest of the UK, and obviously the richer parts of Scotland, like Edinburgh. In the end, there's a Labour government coming next year. That Labour government will raise taxes on the higher earners, which would not be raised by the SNP. It's a government that wouldn't cut corporation tax and race the bottom, as the SNP would do. Now, I'm quite happy with the UK being a rich country in which the richest parts of the country pay the biggest burden of taxation, and that's transferred to where the people need that money.
Mark, did you want to jump in on that? Briefly? Would that be possible?
One of the things is, this is everything that we've been talking about, isn't it? Seriously, this is everything. You know, yesterday I was in Garngad, right, and people were saying that, like 16 to 18-year-olds, 75% are registered to vote. You know, north of Glasgow, you've got sheikhs, you've got the Duke of Westminster. The largest land in the world, the largest concentration of land ownership in the world is in Scotland. It's in Scotland, that's a fact. Listen to this, right? Not only do these people register that land as businesses in the fucking Cayman Islands under all sorts of different names, don't pay no capital gains tax, don't pay no inheritance tax, don't even pay tax. How bad is that? Well, you get this in your nut. Not only that, you pay for them. Millions upon millions of pounds, like farming subsidies. What the hell is that? Well, you're down in a little hall in Garngad listening to bloody, what's his name, Tommy Sheridan with his tan. Do you know what I mean? The guy was impassioned, and whatever he's done in his life, those people was on a wave yesterday when he was talking, because he was telling them that. You know, he told them that. Look, this isn't fair. This isn't we're all in it together. William Hague, £2,000 a day for a mansion house in London, a day. But you want a bedroom for your disabled son? Are you joking? No, this is what it's about. They want the bedroom tax here. They want to privatise your NHS. They've done it down there. Scotland should say yes and not leave England behind, but lead other people to say, you can't keep doing this. That is an epitome. That landowning shit is an epitome for the world. That is an epitome for this country. You know, they burn them, they burn it, they grouse, they've got deers roaming everywhere, eating the roots. So a banker, when he shows up, there's so many deer he can't miss. Do you know what I mean? That's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's not about yes or no. It's about whether you wake up on September the 18th and you think, do you still want Westminster? Do you still want these people to say you can't have your healthcare, you can't have your education, your tuition fees? He's saying to me before, he's saying, politicians make some mistakes. Nick Clegg. Are you joking? A mistake?
Right.
Is that real?
Mark, I think Nick Clegg is usually a good place to stop, just to pause anything. I'm going to invite John. I want to see more questions from the floor, please, but I'm going to ask John just quickly to come back on that.
Look, it's simple. If you want more tax on rich landowners, vote Labour at the next general election. Don't separate Scotland from the United Kingdom. Nobody will benefit from Scotland being separate.
Why people are voting for the SNP, because the SNP have got all the left. Labour is still with the immigration, with the NHS, with the education.
Please let John finish. Nobody gains anything from talking over each other. John, finish your sentence.
Just a simple point. Alex Salmond is personally opposed to raising taxes on the richest, and Alex Salmond personally supports, and the SNP do, cutting taxation on business. And I don't know anybody in Scotland, apart from the SNP, who actually think that business pay too much tax in Scotland at the moment.
Brian, do you want to jump in?
We're not voting for SNP, we're voting for independence.
Exactly. I'm afraid this is really, sorry, but I'm afraid this is where it all gets mixed up. You know, I'm constantly being associated with the MP. I'm a member of the Labour Party, John, and I'm a social democrat, and quite honestly, the failure has been extraordinary in my lifetime. I've seen nothing but 50 years of quite good success on occasion, but a hell of a lot of failure and a hell of a lot of things being sold down the river. Well done on you, man. That was really good what you just said.
Nick, sorry. Oh, can we go to the next question? Because I'm seeing a lot of people wanting in. Okay, someone there about 5 rows. Yes, 5 rows back, and then we'll come to a lady in the pale blue t-shirt.
Hi there. I'm a bit confused, right? I'm sort of a great white settler, originally from Berwick-upon-Tweed, so you can understand my confusion. Where just with all of the propaganda and rhetoric out there, how can anyone believe anything in the media? Because never in the field of Scottish politics have so many carrots been dangled.
Okay. So many carrots. Susan, do you want to talk us through carrots?
Or the Independence White Paper, or, my personal view is very straightforward. I grew up in Wigtonshire, the eldest daughter of a farm worker, so I know everything that Mark is talking about. I have lived that life of where the landowners in Scotland keep the working class down. My politics is absolutely rooted in my class, and my class is spread from Wigtonshire down to Cardiff, up to Shipley and across to Belfast. I believe that the only way that the majority of people in this country, and I mean the United Kingdom, will progress and prosper is if we have a truly social democratic government across all our regions. And I believe in further devolution across the whole of the United Kingdom. In terms of the Independence White Paper, I haven't managed to read all 666 pages of it, but it's a big wish list. You know, they're entitled to put out wish lists.
Carrots. Mark, Brian, thoughts on carrots?
Well, they put out a wish list. Yeah, there are carrots, but they're carrots dangled by everybody, and some of the carrots are extremely corrupt. I mean, you know, I feel that from my point of view, I mean, we all talk from this issue from where we come from. I'm a social democrat. I agree with you about the South, but the system doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and we've seen it not work time and time and time and time again. I was the voice of Labour in 1997. I did all the ads for Labour, and with all the things that you said, John, and I think a lot of that was true, but there was also a lot of stuff going on which was pretty horrific, and a lot of stuff being sold down the river, a lot of ideas that were kind of, you know, siphoned off into various tributaries. And I've just seen the failure of the democratic process more and more and more. And I look at this, my country, and I think there's an opportunity here to shift it, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of what I would like to think could be the United Federation of Britain, as opposed to the United Kingdom of Britain, you know, because it doesn't work. The United Kingdom does not work. It has ceased to function. Now we get, as we have just got with these latest results with the rise of UKIP, the disaffection that have claimed a lot from the Labour Party, and they've claimed more from the Labour Party than from anywhere else. And so you're seeing what is actually something that is something, as Hamlet says, there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. And there's something very clearly rotten, particularly in politics as engendered by the Palace of Westminster. And it hasn't worked, and it isn't working. And it's not working for very, very clear reasons. And the opportunity that we have here is to start again. It's difficult. It's monstrously difficult. And there's no, you know, I can't wave a magic wand and say it's all going to be wonderful, because it may not all be wonderful. You know, but at least it's a start. At least it's a beginning. It's at least getting back to who we are. It's getting back to those principles of the Scottish Enlightenment, of who we are and what we believe in as a nation. And I've seen I'm very proud of my country, because I've seen Scotland survive. When I was a wee boy in Dundee, it was North Britain I was living in. It wasn't Scotland. And Scotland has emerged as Scotland. The next moment is Scotland as a nation, Scotland as a country.
You can live here then if there was a yes vote. Would you come back and help build this new country?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Look, I appreciate the honesty of what Brian said there, because Brian said what very few people on the yes side say, which is it will probably be very difficult. There's too much magic fairy dust about the debate. It'll all be perfect once we get independence. But I want to say this about the United Kingdom. The last Labour government got peace in Northern Ireland and devolved power to an assembly there. The last Labour government, and don't snigger about the idea of peace in Northern Ireland. It's not funny. It's actually not funny. We devolved power to Wales. We devolved power to London. We introduced a Supreme Court, introduced a Human Rights Act, devolved power to Scotland, created a parliament.
Sorry, Mark, please, Mark, let John speak.
The notion that the United Kingdom is A, unchangeable, and B, unreformable, was proved wrong by a Labour government that after 18 years of Thatcherism changed the nature of the country, brought in civil partnerships, brought in the right to join a trade union, brought in a national minimum wage, all transformations of the country, of the United Kingdom, all benefits to people in every part of the United Kingdom. So it's not right to say the United Kingdom has failed. Tory governments have failed. That's very different.
Right, I promised the lady in the blue t-shirt there a question. Sorry, you? Yes, hello.
Okay, thank you. I actually want to get back to the theme, which is media, and to talk a bit more about the BBC and BBC Scotland. The BBC licence fee is £5 billion. That actually funds network commissions from Scotland, particularly high-end drama and high-end factual television, like A History of Scotland. The £320 million that we would get for a Scottish broadcasting service would never be to fund that kind of television. So I would just like to ask what the panel think about that, particularly Brian.
Okay, who's got a thought on 320 versus 5 billion? Well, Brian, do you feel one brewing?
Well, I mean, the thing about the BBC, the principle of the BBC is the right principle. It works in that sense. But the problem is that it's been siphoned in a certain way. It's been kind of, you know, I did a programme for them, for the BBC, which was a lot of effort and a lot of money was spent on it. But very few people were allowed to see it after a while because of into BBC politics. You know, there happens to be another Brian Cox. And I fell foul of that because they thought, oh, we can't have two Brian Coxes doing the same, you know, doing one program or the other. So this Brian Cox fell foul of the other one because he was doing Life on Earth or Life on the Planets or what have you, and I was doing one about addiction, you know. And so there is that kind of censorship that goes on, and don't try and kid yourself that there isn't. There is. It happens constantly. And so you do History of Scotland, but you do History of Scotland in a certain way, which is very good. But it doesn't get the purchase that it should have got, because it's only allowed to go so far and not far enough. There's an element, I'm sorry, but there is an element of tokenism in this, you know.
Tokenism?
Well, I actually think your question sums up the whole debate, because this is actually about the pooling and sharing of our resources right across the United Kingdom. And Scotland shares resources with the rest of our friends, neighbours and colleagues in the rest of the United Kingdom, and we get back on that, whether that's BBC commissions or whether that is pensions for an ageing population. So I am absolutely convinced as I am about anything ever in my whole 57 years of life, that we are much stronger if we stay together. We reform governance. Absolutely, I am up for that debate. I think it's much needed right across the whole of the United Kingdom, not just here. But I think pooling and sharing our resources, BBC, pensions, whatever, is the way forward.
And I actually don't think that'll stop, you see. I think under independent Scotland, that will be looked at. I don't think that will automatically change, because there are certain things which work and are seen to be working and acknowledged to be working. And one of the things is the basic tenor of the BBC seems to work. So I actually think that when push comes to shove, there'll be a debate about it, and I think there's going to be much more cross-fertilisation. I don't think the BBC is going to disappear in an independent Scotland.
I'm seeing... I'm seeing this lady here has had her hand up. I'm worried about it falling off. And then I see this guy in the stripy.
I've got a challenge for each of the panellists. If you had to make the case for the opposing side of the debate to your own, what would you say?
Oh, interesting question. Who's going first? Mark.
Well, if I had to say, like, why not? I suppose, I mean, ultimately, it's
briefly,
like what everyone has said here already, that, you know, that whole thing about being together and being... But to me, that wouldn't change. So my answer is, yeah, that's the argument, you know, and it's just what Susan was just saying, you know, that we're stronger together. I believe that. But to me, that wouldn't change, even with a yes vote.
Okay, interesting. John, give us your best spin.
I'd say it's the ambition of everybody to be independent, to be autonomous, to stand on their own 2 feet. I'd say, of course, it'll be hard. It'll actually cost us money. And let's be honest about this, we'll lose a lot of money, but we'll gain a lot of dignity in doing this. It'll be a hard thing to do, but we should do this together, because every child that leaves home has a lower standard of living than when they live with their parents, but pretty soon they're pretty happy by living on their own, so we should stand on our own 2 feet. That's what I'd say.
Jeez, that's more insincere than what you said before. It sounded insincere.
All right, look, you can do a running commentary on everything I say if you want, but it's actually not meant to be our show, it's meant to be the audience's show.
Yeah, so with Mum in charge here and peace breaking out. Susan?
Yes, James McAvoy spoke about this morning. I was on the Mars show this morning, and his take on it, he hasn't said how he's voting, but his take on it was, yes, of course, if the people of Scotland want to be an independent nation, then of course the people of Scotland should be an independent nation. But that will be difficult. It is not. On the 19th of September, we will still have politicians, who everybody seems to not like very much, running Scotland, and it will be the start of a country where we will be starting from the beginning. It may take generations for us to get as prosperous as we are now. But if people want to do that, then that's absolutely fine. I want something different for my grandchildren, but, you know, if that's what people want, that's fine.
Brian, what's your no?
Nobody said it would be easy anyway. Oh, yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. Well, some people are. That's the trouble, you see.
Yeah,
some people are.
Mainly SNP politicians.
That's why I get worried about it.
Oh, good.
My no.
We want to hear Brian's no.
Well, I would call upon my acting skills, which is also a level of lying as well. So let me just prepare it for you. Because James McAvoy talked about his acting skills. He talked about, I'm an actor, I'm a kind of bona fide liar like politicians are, so we're very similar in that way. So from an acting point of view, I would say, well, the advantage in staying together is the fact that we have an enormous amount to offer to a country that's in deep shit. And therefore, we could lead by perfect example. by being together with that country, we could show them great intellectual fervour, we could show them the meaning of passion, we could show them the real meaning of social democracy, and therefore we could influence, as we have done with our great Scottish Prime Ministers such as Ramsay MacDonald. That's ironic, by the way. You know, so I could go on. Was that good enough for you?
Great answers. The person here, yes. Oh, no, sorry. It was actually the guy in front of you. Are you fine? Well, we can swap next.
My name's Mark. I would just like to congratulate KILTR on an excellent debate. I think the content's been good. It's been informative. I'm also very impressed because we've got 4, to one extent or another, left of centre people on the panel. I'm left of centre, and I think that's a good thing. I live in Denison, not far from where you were in Gangad, or Hag Hill, I think you said, Mark. Yeah. When I'm in London, I stay in an estate, a working class estate in Tower Hamlets. And I think what we're getting to here is a good quality debate about the media, but we need wealth generation to provide the backbone of that media. So I just wonder, maybe perhaps one of the elephants in the room is in the white paper, where it's a drive for cutting of corporate tax. How will that not be the precipitation of a drive to the bottom? Thank you.
So what was that, the cutting the corporate?
Yeah, the proposal in the white paper is to cut corporate tax to such a level. I think, John, you'll probably help me here, 3% or more.
Who wrote that white paper? What, the SNP?
Yeah. Well, the Scottish government, or yeah, exactly.
Scottish government. Scottish government.
Yeah, but even cut the corporate. Do they pay any tax? I mean, Apple, Google, Starbucks, Amazon.
I agree with that. That's the backbone of my point, you know. So why are we going to avoid getting companies coming into Scotland because of the tax level, and when somebody else in Eastern Europe decides to cut corporate tax lower, you know, it pulls out and leave? What I'm saying here is I'm passionate about this debate, and you know, we don't want to get to a situation where we're getting used.
Yeah, but the white paper should just be the start. Do you know what I mean? The first thing you should think about. I mean, this is only like this is very utopian. But the first thing you should be thinking about is how to change the political system. Because the political system at the moment, party politics and all of that, that is rubbish. That is, no one gets any say or anything like that. There should be referendums. Look at the power of this referendum. You should have a fixed term, 5 years. You should have a referendum at the beginning. What are we going to do with health? What are we going to do with education? What are we going to do with welfare? And you should stick to those things. And it should be, the people should be in charge. You can't trust these politicians. Every single politician has a propensity or to be bought. Do you know what I mean? We're not. It's not about politics. It's about the corporatism. It's about the corporations. They're the ones. And exactly, if you should be thinking about how are we going to get these landowners to even think about. They don't even. They live in the Cayman Islands, and it's just ridiculous. It is absolutely a ridiculous state of affairs.
Mark in the audience, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think we're
Could we have the microphone to Mark, please?
Yeah, I can shout. It's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry. The rigours of technology. I mean, I agree. I think we're coming from the same point here. But Mark, do you understand my point and my concern that, you know, it all gets put into a certain element of that can be sidelined if there's not wealth creation? So, in order to have that quality media that we're talking about, to have a BBC, to have, you know, independent institutions that are not based on corporate structure, not based on advertising, we do need to have wealth generation. I've saw some of your stuff. You know, I just thought it was really interesting as well when you interviewed Galloway, and you agreed on most things, and I agree with most of those things, but apart from independence.
Yeah, but I think the idea of the white paper or whatever's written in that is 666 pages. When I was listening to Tommy Sheridan yesterday, he's saying why are you even thinking about? Why are you even reading that? What does that even mean? Do you know what I mean? Because if you know anything about event theory, even if you go to meet someone for breakfast tomorrow, you know the possibilities of what can happen are enormous. You might get sick, you might not turn up, but you're already thinking about what. It's like when you're getting married, you're thinking about what's going to happen. You're playing events in front. The first thing to do would be, the first thing to do would be to say that you have to change things. If you sign that paper, you are signing away your NHS. You are signing away your social security. You're signing away to corporations immediately. If you want to stay with the status quo, So you're telling me, right, the privatisation of probation, the privatisation of child protection. Are you joking?
So, Mark, I'm going to let John jump in here and, without possibly reference to event theory, to talk us through corporation tax.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing about what Mark's saying. There's two things I really disagree with. One is we're not discussing the Tory government in Westminster's policies about probation service or child protection or the NHS in England. There are different policies here proposed by all the political parties in Scotland. So it's a straw man. The second thing is I don't believe, as Mark seems to, that all politicians can be bought and sold. I don't believe that Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney, Alec Neil can be bought and sold. I don't think that's right. I actually think we've got a decent bunch of politicians in Scotland in all the political parties. We disagree with each other, but that is different from saying that your politicians are for sale or on the block. When it comes to corporation tax, the fact is, for a long time, for 20 years, Alex Salmond has believed in cutting taxes on business. That is a perfectly sensible policy if you are a centre-right politician. I'm not a centre-right politician. I belong to a centre-left political party, and I don't believe there's any evidence that Scottish business pays too much tax. And Mark actually confirmed that when he said, well, what about, there's no harm in cutting corporation tax because some corporations pay none. Actually, don't cut the corporation tax and make the corporations who don't pay tax pay the tax in this country. And actually work, let's actually see some of the tax havens that are British Virgin Islands, the Isle of Man, Jersey and Guernsey, the Channel Islands, actually crack down on. But there would be a race to the bottom if in an independent Scotland, the SNP formed a government, which is very likely, if there were to be an independent Scotland, and pursued the policies they've set out in the white paper of cutting taxes on business and not raising the higher rate of taxation. Now, if you think that that is left to centre, you've probably not got the same view of being a left-wing person as I have. Not raising taxes on rich people and cutting taxes on business would be bad for Scotland. That's the beginning and end of it, and that's what the manifesto of the SNP set out in their white paper is. That's what you get if you vote for independence. I'm not saying there's not other things you get too, but you get a government committed at its highest levels to cutting taxes on business, and I don't think that's right.
Brian? Well, taxes in an independent Scotland? Wealth creation?
I think there are good corporations and there are bad corporations. There are corporations that need to be encouraged to actually increase the wealth of the country, and there are bad corporations who are using the islands to get away, like Google, to get away with paying. So I really you've got to sort the white hats from the black hats out. You can't just say blanketly, all corporations are bad, therefore they all should be attacked. You've actually got to know who you're going for and what you're going for, and because you need growth. We do need people to be able to do things. We do need people to be able to, in an independent Scotland, we're certainly going to need people to start businesses, to get businesses going. And they're going to have to be given a hand. They're going to have to be given a help. But it's the guys that come in here, it's like all that kind of money that's sitting in London now, that illegal Russian money that nobody does anything about. That's why everybody says, well, let's not go too far with Crimea because we're going to upset the city of Westminster. We're going to upset the city, and the finances in the city, which is a lot of it is very corrupt Russian money. So I think it's a very hard one, that particular call, because you can't just be blanket about it and just say corporation tax, bad thing, letting them get away with it. But at the same time, you've got to encourage people to grow. So you've got to say, yeah, it's in your interest. But also, you've got to stop the people from getting out of hand.
I see. Oh,
Anna, can I just come in quickly
very quickly.
I think you've got to the nub of the matter. There's a fundamental dishonesty at the heart of the white paper, and the white paper is the offer that the people of Scotland have been presented with. And that fundamental dishonesty is that you can have a right-wing tax regime that will somehow fund public services that are even better than we have now. And that is not correct. It is a lie.
Brian, the white paper, is it dishonest? Quickly, and then I'm coming to...
Well, I haven't read all 600 because I'm working.
Don't you go on a long journey?
I've got lines to learn. I have not been able to, go through chapter and verse. But I think the basic principles are good, are right. I mean, the SNP are the ones that are leading this. I'm not an SNP. I'm not a Scottish nationalist. I'm not centre-right. But then I look at the SNP of today and the SNP of when I was a kid, when it was very, very, very right-wing. And I've noticed it's got less and less and less and less and less and less and less right-wing as my life has gone on, you know. And I think they talk a lot of sense.
Right. Person patiently waiting for his question.
I'll just... Oh, all right. 2 points. One, if you don't like the SNP manifesto, don't vote the SNP. Vote a different party after a yes vote. I think that's really simple. 2, and then I'll get to my question. John, you spoke about peace in Northern Ireland. That's very nice and all, but people in the Middle East who you brought fear to over weapons did not exist. They're not living in peace anymore. That was your government. Anyway, to my question. I do believe the BBC are fairly biased. Every morning I go to school, I listen to Good Morning Scotland, and mainly it's negatives against Scottish independence. I'll give you a good example. Ian Taylor of Vitol, an oil company, gave £500,000 to Better Together of blood money when he's putting dirty deals in the Middle East as well. I'll go relate this to
Are we
media.
getting to the question?
Yes, this is the point, yes. And he threatened to hurt down on the media, social media, on National Collective, Wings Over Scotland, and the Herald. And I realised that now, after that, they escalated in views on social media due to the fact that this was never actually covered and they were being sued for this. So do you think that the biasness within the media right now, on the BBC and the newspapers, is affecting the fact that artist groups are actually growing in this independence movement?
Yeah. We're getting John's getting the impression that question is directed at him, so I'll let him jump in.
So, I completely buy the argument that people are free to vote for who they want at any election in Scotland. I don't like Scottish taxpayers' money being spent on an SNP manifesto masquerading as a white paper, being given to people, distributed to them, and people are told, this is what independence would mean. Then whenever you question any element of it, people go, oh, that's not really about what we'd have. It's only what you'd get if you'd have the SNP. Well, don't spend taxpayers' money on a manifesto if it's not. If it's an SNP manifesto, publish it and print it yourself out at McDonald Road or wherever the HQ is. Now, second point is, I've worked in Baghdad. I've worked in Kurdistan. People in Kurdistan don't say, why did you invade to liberate us from a fascist dictator? They say, why did you wait so long to liberate us from a fascist dictator? Iraq has now had a series of democratic elections. Afghanistan has had a series of democratic elections. Women can go to school to teach, and girls can go to school to learn in Afghanistan because the Taliban do not run that country. It's a democratic country. Will there be difficulties in the future? Yes. Will we support those governments in Iraq and in Afghanistan? Yes, we will. Is it wrong to stand aside when there are dictatorships doing what Saddam did, doing what the Taliban were doing? It is wrong to stand aside. Now, this isn't a debate about that. We came to a question about this. The answer is, I genuinely think, and I've been in politics for a long time now, and I've done it myself, the moment that you start claiming that the press are biased against you, actually you've got to stop and go, maybe we're not making the right argument. Maybe it's not that people are biased against us. Maybe it is actually we're not cutting through because the argument's not strong. It really is the last refuge of a political scoundrel to say they're all against us, right? The truth is, we've talked about this before, the journalism is under pressure in Scotland. The newspapers are under pressure. There are no press barons that go around dictating the terms of Scottish political discourse. It doesn't happen. People are independent, have access to all kinds of resources. The tragedy is that great papers like the Scotsman and the Herald and the Courier and the Press and Journal don't have the same circulation that they used to have and don't have the same resources. How we can support journalism and find the finance to support good quality journalism representing a range of views. I'm happy to write for the Scotsman because I write with a bunch of very good writers, which include people who are for independence and people who are against independence and people who are simply business correspondents who just tell the facts as they are. But there really, genuinely, honestly isn't a big media conspiracy where a bunch of us in London get together with the government, and with the people who own newspapers and say, here's the line, let's dictate to Scotland. It doesn't work if a newspaper tries to tell people what to think. You've got to sell a newspaper. People have to willingly buy it every single day. And I think it's a bit of it just is a diversion. It's good to build all the voices that we can have, as many voices with as many different points of view on the web, through social media, but it really doesn't help the debate between any of us if we actually create these straw men that don't exist.
I think that did go over ground we've covered already, so I'm going to take another question from the cardigan at the front row, whose arm I'm also worried about.
Is it John? Can I just say, first of all, John, I was going to ask a question, but everything I just heard you say, I think's complete lies. Afghanistan, much worse. You know how it's worse? What have we built in Afghanistan? We've not built anything. The Taliban were going to come to America and negotiate with them before the war, and they were going to give up bin Laden. They came to America, they discussed it, it's in the New York Times, you can read it anywhere. That was imperialism, hard imperialism, to go back to these countries. Iraq, depleted uranium. Fallujah, have you seen the young babies, Cyclops babies and things like that? Have you seen what we've done to that country? We put that guy in power. Margaret Thatcher gave him arms. America gave him arms. It goes all the way back to, the 1950s.
Soviet Union, the French.
It goes back further than that. It goes back to the First World War. It goes back to the creating of Mesopotamia in the first place.
Mesopotamia. Yeah, so that was that point. But the reason I was wanting to say was
Did you have a question?
Well, it was about the BBC and the media and
Great.
the control system. It's like you've got the banking situation that collapsed 2008 circa. You've got the NHS being privatised, as Chunky knows. So why is it the non-exec directors at that time were Val Golding, who's Bupa head, and Marcus Agius, Barclays Bank? So it seems a bit strange to have those two characters in the BBC non-exec director board when we've got a banking crisis and the NHS perhaps being sold off. What do you think of that?
Sorry, can I just clarify? I'm not clear what your question exactly is.
Is that independent? Is that an independent?
Impartial.
Okay, right.
Well, I think one of the things is especially about the NHS within the BBC, if anyone that was aware around the time of the National Health Act in 2002, there was a sustained attack from all media, including the BBC. I even challenged someone to find out how many articles have been written that directly attacked the NHS, a controlled demolition against nurses, every single day, another story. And
Can I interrupt for a minute? Because the National Health Service, since 1999, has been under the Scottish Parliament. The people of Scotland run the National Health Service. It is not being privatised. So this is a bit of a red. The National Health Service in Scotland is not in danger of being privatised. It is run by the Scottish Parliament. So I think the debate.
How long until the SNP privatised the health service?
Okay, can we have...
Well, just one more thing. I just wanted to say to John, can you tell me the name of the hospital that we built in Afghanistan?
Can't tell you the name of the hospital.
Do you know, after 12 years of nation building, the United Nations, NATO, America, Britain, they never built one hospital.
True. That's actually not true.
There is one hospital in Afghanistan. It's an Italian hospital.
It's not true.
Tell me the name of the hospital then.
1 out of 10 people in Afghanistan had access to healthcare before the NATO ISAF forces. The NATO ISAF forces went into Afghanistan.
You listen. You go after and you find me the name of the hospital that is built. That guy who made a documentary on Channel 4 News, who lost both his legs and his arms, a photographer, who went back to Afghanistan. He said, "I can't believe." That was his words. After 12 years of nation building, they haven't got a hospital. He went to a charitable Italian hospital to find Afghanistan children and men and women that had lost their limbs.
Can I just say that I know...
Never built a hospital. Built a KFC, built a Pizza Hut.
I have to note that since we moved from Scottish independence to Afghanistan, 3 or 4 people have left. I feel this is getting a bit nasty. I don't think this is what most people, sorry if I'm wrong, I don't feel this is what most people came here to talk about today. Can we have a question that's pertinent to Scottish independence, please, from someone that I haven't heard from already? At the back, at the kind of middle, dark, yes, you.
Hello. I want to sort of get back to the theme of media and Scottish independence because I'm surprised that so far nobody's mentioned the study that was carried out by Professor John Robertson of University of West Scotland, which identified bias in the BBC coverage of the independence referendum. Now, it was a very nuanced and complex study, and you found that while in crude terms broadcasts were balanced, on balance, broadcasts often began with bad news about the Yes campaign rather than good news about the Yes campaign, and that overall there was a sort of possibly unconscious bias going on. And so I sort of wanted to just hear some reflection from each member of the panel on this matter. I feel that this study, which was a huge, very systematic study by Professor John Robertson and his team, has been massively underreported in the media. And the thing is, and I also just wanted to say to John McTernan, bias isn't the same as conspiracy. And I think it's unfair to label people who identify bias in the media as somehow conspiracy theorists. Professor John Robertson isn't a conspiracy theorist. He's a media studies academic. He understands that the media works in a complicated way. People take their jobs seriously. They do the best job they can. However, bias can happen in spite of everyone's best efforts not to be biased. So, I'd just like to hear the panel's reflections on that matter.
Okay, John. Can bias just happen despite of everyone's best efforts?
No, I think that's nonsense. I think the report's nonsense. I really genuinely... I've read the report. I disagree with it. I think the BBC do an incredibly good job in reporting everything in the report. I'm not one of the people who sit around and just go... you can see what a stretch it is to say it's not actually conscious bias, it's a kind of unconscious bias, and it's like, seriously, it's an attempt to put some academic scaffolding around an assertion. That's all. I don't agree with it.
I think one of the things I think about is the BBC. You know, the rest of the world is in awe of the BBC. They can't believe that the English have this state broadcaster. It's incredible. When he was saying that, there's no one having... They're having meetings every single day with the newspapers. David Cameron meets the newspapers all the time. But the BBC Englishness is about... It's the Nietzschean collective morality. It's about the civilised and the uncivilised. It's about we're the good people and they're the bad people. That's the way that it works. But the BBC, what they do and what the British media does is they give you all these bits. It's fine. Have this. It's progressive. Have a look at this. This is challenging. This is critique. But what I said to you before, the main news, the 6 o'clock and the main lines come out, the strap lines, the headlines.
Yeah, Mark, we've heard you make this point already today. I was hoping that Brian had some thoughts. The Robertson report, academic scaffolding?
Yes, it's not academic scaffolding. It's a very careful report that's been very well thought through by a man who really knows what he's talking about. We also have Mr. Jappy, who is this Scottish civil servant who talked about exactly the same thing. And it isn't getting through, and there is clearly some kind of system that is stopping it from getting through, and the BBC could actually be at fault here.
Two more... Very, very quickly.
Yeah. Always leave the women to last, but never mind. It's okay. The Robertson report, you said yourself that it's very nuanced and very complex. I think he completely misses the point of news. He probably hasn't spent much time in a newsroom, because what newsrooms and news editors and editors thrive on is bad news. So if there's bad news affecting the Better Together campaign or bad news affecting Yes Scotland, that is what the newsroom will lead on. It is not bias, it is how journalism, news journalism works.
That's also the researchers and the people, that's the rise of UKIP, that's Nigel Farage. Because the people that work in the BBC, everyone knows, get this nutter on. Get him on now, because our ratings are going to go up.
Mark,
they're interested in
Mark,
celebrity...
We've only got time for 2 more questions, please, so I'm keen to get a broad range. I'm seeing, now you're all waving to me. Now with back with the red hair and then down at the right here, and I'm afraid that's us. And everyone's going to be succinct.
I'll try our best. I had the pleasure this morning of seeing a Vote No Borders advert at the cinema, which was in my opinion, a lie. It turned round and was on about, oh, we can't split up because we have the National Health Service. As you yourself has pointed out, the health service in Scotland has been run separately since its inception. So why, as this is a grassroots organisation, did the BBC push it on the hour every day, whereas anyone who's done any research on it has seen that this has been funded by a PR company in London? Thank you.
Susan. Yes, in terms of why the BBC decided to run a story on No Borders, you'd have to ask the BBC. I think it's a legitimate news story. That a campaign... That's okay, I'll wait until you're finished. I think it's legitimate for people across the United Kingdom who want the United Kingdom to stay together have a voice. And in terms of lies and campaigns, I was brought up in a farm worker's cottage. I brought my children up, my 2 sons up in Wester Hailes, which if you don't know Edinburgh, is one of the big peripheral housing estates. I brought them up as a single parent in the 1980s. The worst campaign material I've seen in recent weeks is the picture of a dirty child purporting to be a child living in poverty in Scotland, which the Yes Scotland people have put out, saying that there'll be 100,000 more children in poverty. Every child I know who comes from a low-income family, parents never send their kids out looking like that. I thought it was disgusting to use poverty in that way. So I think there will be campaigning material on both sides that the other side will object to. That is the nature of a campaign. But at the heart of this, can I finish, please? I'll be brief because I've got to go home and look after my 3-month-old granddaughter shortly. Because at the heart of this, it will be individuals, it will be us, every one of us, and the people outside, more importantly, who will make that decision on September the 18th. And they will do it from what they believe in their heart and what they believe in their head, not whether Vote No Borders had an advert on the cinema or Yes Scotland had billboards on poverty.
We're going to go to the last question now, please. I promised that to someone up in that bar corner there. Oh, sorry, no, I didn't. No, I'm being caught out now. I promised it to this guy there. I'm so sorry. Who's going to grab first? I'm so sorry. Last question. We're running out of time. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Derek. I'm not an artist and I'm not in the media, but I've got a great appreciation of both. And what I've seen over the past 6 months, and it might just be my own view on it, but I've seen a real upsurge in the BBC parading Scottish artists out in shows where I've actually not seen the talent coming from the artist that deserves a position on the show. And I'm wondering if we're trying to be pacified with the BBC on the run-up to September, that they're firing people out in the street to find MD with a bit of tartan on, so that they can actually look as if they're giving us a proportional representation.
Okay.
Well, the BBC, their prime time is Gary Barlow and James Corden. I think as an artist, I think that, you know, you should be pretty ashamed of that stuff. And you talk about, and that came a couple of days before his thing, which was...
I'm a yes vote, but
yeah.
I just don't like to see it.
Yeah, Brian, do you agree with that we're being shown a lot more people with tartan in the run-up to the referendum?
I'll have to take your word for it. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it is true. But I haven't been here, so I haven't really witnessed that.
Your feelings?
Yeah, this is just more of that insane paranoia. Seriously.
Okay, well, it's not paranoia or it's insane paranoia. I'm afraid on that point, yeah, we're out of time, everybody. We're going to have to leave it now. Thank you so much for everybody for coming today, for sharing your opinions, for joining in the debate. Thank you. Yeah. Brian's going to say something.
Off with saying a big huge thanks to all our panel, Brian, Mark, Susan, John, Susan and Anna. Sorry, got that mixed up there. I'd just like to finish off on a really, really quick point, and it's a point both on media and on poverty. I grew up in poverty, and I've worked really hard getting KILTR off the ground, building a tech platform against all the odds in the West End of Glasgow. We're managing it, we're getting there, and we're winning, but it hasn't been easy. And hey, it's not because I grew up in poverty. We can change this poverty moving into September, and I think we need change, and I think everybody needs to stand up and agree that this current situation is not working. Absolutely not working. And I think we all have to get up and agree that that is the case. Anyway, thanks again to the whole panel. Thank you.